Justin here with another chapter review from The Rainbow Machine, Tales from a Neurolinguist's Journal. You can buy this on Amazon, and then if you bought it, you can leave a review. That would be really appreciated. There's a link in the comment section below. In the description, I should say. Alright, so this chapter I'm looking at now is Heaviness. And this was based around my experience very early on as a hypnotherapist. So when I first learned hypnosis, it was Ericksonian hypnotherapy. I'd never actually heard of Erickson. I managed to do, I was about 3 months into the course before I actually looked up what Erickson actually meant in terms of Ericksonian hypnotherapy. I was completely naive, I just signed up for a course that looked good. And I've got to say, it was very good. It was taught by Stephen Brooks. At the time, it was the Royal Masonic Hospital, which was actually the appeal. That was why I signed up for it. I had no idea who Stephen Brooks was or what Ericksonian hypnotherapy was. I just wanted to do a hypnosis course. And I naively thought it was Erik Erikson, the psychologist. I thought that was where the name had come from. So it was a few months in before I started to actually look up, okay, who is this Milton Erickson kind of guy? Now, when I first learned hypnosis, it was one of those things, it blew my mind that there was essentially a way of categorizing and cataloging language and language patterns, and communication was actually something that could be learned and studied and improved. That was mind-blowing to me. I must have been 21 at the time, 21 years old. And the level of work, the level of knowledge that was in language patterns and what could be done with it was mind-blowing to me. I was familiar with lots of bits and pieces, but nothing to the depth that Ericksonian hypnotherapy and then NLP later on gave me. So I started practicing at every opportunity. Now, I worked at Southampton General Hospital at the time, and those who were there at the time will possibly remember my posters that went up in every department, on every notice board, everywhere, recruiting volunteers that I could practice on and basically try stuff out with. And what was interesting to me was just how many people were willing to be volunteers. I had no shortage of volunteers at all. And for those starting out, I would highly recommend advertise yourself as somebody who's starting out. You'll be amazed at just how many people will volunteer. Simply because they're not being a client, they're helping somebody out. And so for a lot of people, it's a good opportunity to test the waters. Is this something I want to do for myself? But they can dress it up under the guise they're doing something for somebody else. So they're not making an identity transition from being a person who's just going through life with normal difficulties to being a person with problems that needs help. And so that's what happens when somebody seeks a therapist. They have an identity transition that happens there. But when they're seeing a trainee or a newbie and they're helping out the newbie, then they're not making that identity transition. So it's worth exploring if you're starting out and you want to get some practice sessions in. With that in mind, something I recommend everybody does, and I say this on virtually every course I ever do, and people don't. Position a video camera over the shoulder of your client and point it back at yourself. Don't video the client, video yourself. If you're horrified at what you see, brilliant, this is good news, because it shows you can now measure the improvement that you'll make over time. And you'll start to become aware of the differential between what you thought you were doing, what you thought you were communicating, what you thought you were expressing with your facial stuff, and what actually was happening. And when I started to do this myself, it was horrifying. To hear my own voice, to see my facial expressions and the incongruencies that I was presenting did come as a bit of a shock to me. I had no idea. And it did start to explain and make sense a few of the social problems I was experiencing at the time, because I could see actually what other people were experiencing. And I always assumed that other people were experiencing what I was intending, and of course it doesn't work that way. So video yourself in your early sessions. In fact, as many sessions as you can, because it will be some of the best personal development you can ever do. Now, one of the areas that I was actively advertising for, because I was looking for what I thought of as simple problems, and the simple problems being your classic things of hypnotherapy like stopping smoking and weight loss. Now, anyone that's worked clinically in those two areas, they're not simple problems at all. Actually, they're two of the hardest areas to work with. Although the chapter in the Rainbow Machine actually makes out that, oh, this is really easy. It's not actually that easy, to be honest. But I'll explain that shortly. And actually working with people with eating issues and working with people with smoking issues is actually a very complicated and at times very challenging thing to do. There's simple problems for new therapists because there's nothing you're not likely to do any damage to a person, and they're not problems of a mental health nature or a something where you're going to have psychosis, emotion, stuff like that. So they're simple problems to work with in terms of there's limited risk that you can actually expose the person to if you don't know what you're doing and you're starting out. My observation of overweight people that were volunteering was just how easily hypnotizable they were. Now, they always say everyone can be hypnotized to different degrees, and that's really, I think that's just a framing that therapists like to say, because the person was sat there with their eyes closed and being compliant. Well, that was trance. Maybe the client was just pretending, but the therapist will always frame it when it was trance, really. But with the overweight people that I worked with, I recognized that the weird hypnotic phenomena that we associate with genuine hypnosis, the stuff that the guys on the stage, the performers, are able to do in their stage shows with hypnosis, it seemed that the clientele who would I could elicit that phenomena from most commonly would be the overweight people, and that really caught my attention. Now, I've always puzzled about what that phenomena even is in the first place. I still don't know. I don't have a reasonable explanation as to what's going on there. But I do know that some people are much more susceptible to that phenomena and much more susceptible to suggestion, and that's what that particular chapter is about, than would be considered average. I'm loath to say the word normal there. And I now think this explains the obesity epidemic. One of the things with obesity as an issue, it's a massive global issue, and it's becoming more of an issue as countries become more affluent and food availability increases. But I'm not entirely convinced that the obesity epidemic is down to individual choices, bad choices that people make, and poor parenting. Because one of the things we are aware of is that obese parents are likely to have obese children, because those obese parents, of course, are feeding those children and are likely to be giving them the same kind of stuff they eat themselves. And it's very easy to blame those individuals. It's very easy to blame those parents. And now, given all the stuff, all these years later, and the stuff that I'm now aware of as a hypnotist, as a therapist, and aware of modern research, I'm not convinced that is the correct story. And the eat less, move more, which I used to promote as a motif, is a good way to lose weight. I'm not convinced by this at all. I think the obesity epidemic lies entirely and solely at the hand of the food industry. Just have a look at the sheer extent of food advertising that goes on. One of the things the food industry knows is the neurobiology of appetite and the hungers that we have. And if you look into the limbic system, and I'll do a section on this series around limbic system and brain stuff, the drives that we have, the hungers that we have, are also very closely related to love and sex and hunger and thirst. Because we hunger for love, we hunger for sex, we crave love, we crave food, we can crave sex. The food industry absolutely knows this. And of course, we have this weird thing of food porn. And if you look at certain adverts, like Marks and Spencer adverts, where they have literally made video footage of people eating and given it a pornographic feel and presentation. They know how well that works because it follows the neuroscience. Now, across the board, the advertising industry knows how to implant suggestion, how to create branding images which implant very firmly in your brain, and how to essentially create a perfect advert, which is a hypnotic suggestion. It's a magical spell. And these adverts are absolutely everywhere. And of course, food is an essential thing. You can't go without food unless you're breatharian. Have a look. If you don't know breatharians, just type into YouTube breatharians. It's fantastic what you'll find. Some really crazy people out there, and a lot of dead people now as a result of those things. But what we have is a very powerful marketing body that has a guaranteed audience and a guaranteed market, who know exactly how to market things and get people to eat more. The movie that was made, Super Size Me, is also worth watching, as are the popular economic books around the economics of supersizing a meal for just 5 pence more. Because actually, collectively, that 5 pence or 10 pence, whatever it is a very small amount. To encourage the person to consume more, economically, those chips, those fries that are being served up are probably worth a penny, if that. And cumulatively across the nation, that's a lot of money that is being increased in terms of revenue. So a lot of money is made by encouraging people to eat more. And of course, who is going to follow those suggestions? Who are the people who will be hypnotized into compliance? The people who are most readily hypnotizable. So it's not that obese people are more hypnotizable. I don't believe that for a second. It's the other way around. People who are much more readily hypnotizable and much more vulnerable to suggestion are much more likely to be vulnerable to the advertising messages to consume more. And advertising messages that are trying to sell you something you don't need, there's a degree of resistance built in there. But advertising and hypnotic suggestions that are suggesting you do something that's a biological imperative and that you have neurological apparatus to receive those suggestions for, then of course those vulnerable people are likely to be hypnotized and seduced by those things. And one way that I look at hypnosis, it does depend on the process that people are following, but hypnosis and seduction have a very, very similar, they're very parallel to each other, they're very similar things. And so people are seduced into eating more. People are seduced by food. Food is used as a seduction process as well. And so this is all hardwired into people. Those people more vulnerable to consuming media, consuming messages, the consumption, that means eating, the consumption of media, the consumption of hypnotic messages are much more likely to end up with weight issues, and they won't know it. And this is the most important thing, because what do we know about post-hypnotic suggestion? People don't realize that that is a post-hypnotic suggestion. But why? Because it becomes a belief, and you'll hear these beliefs in their expression, and you'll hear it by the use of people's pronouns. When people use the word you in place of I, you know they're operating from a position of belief which arises from post-hypnotic suggestion. Now this gets a little bit complicated. This is stuff I teach on the IMT course, and I'll do a video at some point on this particular aspect of pronoun use. But you'll hear when people switch their pronouns. So I do get hungry, you know? So I do get hungry, you know. I do get hungry, you know, but you can't help it at the supermarket. There's so many things to choose from, isn't there? You just can't help but... And they switch to the you can't help it. And they're talking about you, but actually they're talking about themselves from a position of belief. And that belief, people defend their beliefs. And that is the perfect hypnotic suggestion to put into people. Get them to believe something and then operate on that belief. And they won't even know they're doing it. And that's the great thing about hypnosis, of course, because you create an amnesia for when the suggestion went in. And how many people remember their their adverts that they get barraged with on a daily basis, where that message is repeated, and then repeated some more, and people act on it. I will be interested in what other hypnotherapists and hypnotists think on this particular theme. Do please use that comment section. Am I right? Do you agree? I have a simple position now, which I think the fight on obesity is lost. And we can put children into fat camps as much as we like. We can try and educate those children at school as much as we like. But unless we actually bring an action against the food industry, and basically people can sue the food industry for being made fat. This sounds like an abdication of responsibility, of course, because in that we have this thing about you choose what you put in your mouth. Yeah, of course we do. But would you blame somebody on a stage show who's hypnotized into doing certain stuff? Would we be blaming them for the actions they then do to themselves, or the embarrassment they create? Would we blame them, or would we blame the stage show and the hypnotist? And I think we would probably blame the stage show and the hypnotist. I think we should blame the food industry entirely for the obesity epidemic, and it's killing a lot of people. It's ruining. I look at some children. We've got some children locally here, and they're horribly obese, and they got horrendously obese parents. And these children are like 5 years old, and I think, my God, are they ever? If they're fat cells, I understand how the metabolic stuff happens in fat cells. Now they've got a set. Once they hit puberty at that weight, are they ever going to be able to lose weight? Is food always going to be a central thing in their life? Are they now having their parents as vectors of the hypnotic suggestion, and there's a grooming training process that is going in at a developmental level to that child's brain? And they will probably, their lives have been cut short and compromised from a happiness, health and freedom point of view. And they're completely enslaved by this food industry. that is my one. There's always going to be counterexamples. We can always find counterexamples where we have the slack person who just, they will feed themselves regardless. But why is this thing moving in waves as mass media, not as affluence necessarily increases and food availability increases, but as mass media and mass marketing increases? That seems to be what's driving the obesity epidemic. I say, do please use the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts. I will be fascinated to know any contrary views, any supporting views, or any evidence you might have, research papers and everything else. Do please stick the links in the comments below.